Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the podcast where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who got rich off of homemade moonshine, Mr. Ryan Seabold.
What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
I am doing well, here to discuss movies with you, one of my favorite things in the world. And we have got a hell of a film here today by an up-and-coming young whippersnapper by the name of Chris Nolan that you all should be looking out here for.
Keep an eye out for that guy. He's going places.
And we are looking at his film Dunkirk. Do you have a description for us, buddy?
I do. Google has this described as, in May 1940, Germany advanced into France, trapping Allied troops on the beaches of Dunkirk. Under air and ground cover from British and French forces, troops were slowly and methodically evacuated from the beach using every serviceable naval and civilian vessel that could be found. At the end of this heroic mission, 330,000 French, British, Belgian, and Dutch soldiers were safely evacuated. Like you said, this is directed by a little upstart named Chris Nolan. This made $527 million against a budget of about $100 million. It was nominated for a boatload of awards, won a few, and deserved every one of them as far as I'm concerned. This was a very, very unique movie experience. This is one of my favorites, especially in the war genre. I had not seen this in quite some time. And for some reason, I had it in my head that this was more of a slow burn than it was the fever pitch and intense film that it was. You know, some of those, some films have like a epilepsy warning, like a trigger warning, like Enter the Void or whatever. This should have like a high blood pressure warning. I kept thinking that, like, this movie had
it's
me
very
stressed.
tense. It's very suspenseful. Absolutely. In that respect,
know how it ends.
reminded,
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it reminded me of Captain Phillips in that respect, where it was just like the slow burn intensity of like war and hostage situations and these very real situations that occur in international warfare, you know?
Right.
But yeah, instead of being the hyper violent Saving Private Ryan kind of film, no, it's more of the like slow burn, almost kind of like a thriller-ish sort of thing, you know? So
Right.
Yeah. I have to say, I quite dug it as well. And before we really get into it, I do want to go ahead and tell our audience to go ahead and like and subscribe to this video and our channel. And also, if you have an opinion on this film or our review of it, whether you agree or disagree, please go ahead and leave that in the comments section below. We would legitimately love to hear from you. Now, so Ryan, yeah, I'm with you, man. I loved this film way more than I thought I would, actually. For whatever reason, I had kind of got it into my head, similar to you, that it wasn't really like considered a strong film. And it was actually, I realized it was the only Chris Nolan film outside of Oppenheimer currently that I haven't seen before. So it was the lone spot. It would have been following, but we actually looked at that episode in season 2 or 3. I think it was 3 actually on the audio podcast. So having seen following, I only had Dunkirk to check off the box. And it was odd because first thing that really took me by surprise, because we all know that like Nolan is a long-winded bastard when it comes to his movies, right? Like he's not there to get out anytime soon. And this movie is an hour and 47 minutes, including credits, which is really remarkable for a Chris Nolan film. I thought that might mean that there wasn't really a lot of meat on the bone and it was just kind of like, okay, let's get in and out. And that was not the case at all. It was exactly as long as it needed to be. It could have been longer, but I don't think that it would have gotten any more information. Like, I don't think we would have learned anything. It wasn't necessary, you know? So I appreciated the fact that he was willing to be economical when the story and the film called for it, because we don't always see that from him, you know?
Right. And you don't always get the chance to see such micro war films where you're narrowed down to just one small thing. You know, you're never cutting back to, you know, war generals in a room with maps and, you know, what's FDR doing or where's Truman at or whatever, you know, Stalin and Hitler and, you know, all the nuances of the politics of war. This, you know, trimmed all of that down to just, it was more of a tale of survival and humanity than it was a war movie. You know, these were people that were put in a very specific situation that just so happened to be during war. And also telling the story because it's Chris Nolan. So of course, but out of order in 3 different parts, you're covering land, sea, and air. And if all that wasn't enough for your Captain Planet bingo card, they threw in some fire on the water as well. So yeah, it was just, there was a lot going on, but yeah, kudos to the brevity for under 2 hours to tell such a complex story from multiple angles, covering so many different people's point of view.
Yeah, definitely. And then of course, it's a technically astounding film. I mean,
dude.
First of all of his films are that way, right? Like say what
Right.
you will about Nolan and his storytelling, just from the mood that he evokes to the effects that are always very seamlessly done, and the sound design, the cinematography, right? Everything about his film technically is a masterclass in cinema, and you really can't take that away from anything. Like I said, maybe you don't necessarily appreciate the stories he tells. I know you famously didn't like Tenet, so it's not like it works all the time for everyone. But yeah, even in a film like that, I think you can argue like technically it's probably a masterpiece.
Sure.
Now that they fixed the sound, which I still don't
haven't
know
seen
why
it.
he does that. Like why
I haven't
is he...
seen it since they fixed the sound. So yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why he's so insistent. Like, remember the whole story about when Dark Knight Rises came out and nobody could understand Bane? And
Right.
he was just like, well, doesn't matter because, that's how someone would sound wearing a mask. And it's like, okay, but like this is a movie. And if I don't understand the character and the bad guy's motivations, it's going to take away from my experience.
Right.
So like, let's split that gap. Right. And he did. And it worked.
Do you
I don't
feel
think anyone was sitting there like,
do you feel in control of your podcast, Jason? Now, Ryan, I'd like to talk to you about the acting. What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy? What do you think about this movie?
Yeah. So, but outside, but like this film obviously doesn't even allow for him to do that, right? Like these are all just sold. This is World War II. There's no masks. There's no anything like that. It's not like he's got knights under some helmet or anything like that. And so, no opportunities for that. But it's not to say that he doesn't necessarily make some interesting decisions with regards to sound design. So
Yeah.
one of the aspects that I noticed about this film is, first of all, it's his longtime collaborator doing the score of Hans Zimmer, right? We sort of
Zimmer.
mentioned that like Chris Nolan has reduced Hans Zimmer to like a sound designer, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a guy that has like been doing melody for decades. And, here comes Chris Nolan like, oh, I just want you to do like a really low droning tone. And then Hans is like, do I get paid the same? And he's like, absolutely. Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, sure. You got it, buddy.
I call this Hans Zimmer's ticking clock era, where every single score he's done has some kind of ticking clock involved. Dark Knight opens with it. This has it. You can go back and look at all these different, I think Interstellar has it as well. It's this constant tick, 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 in some fashion, there's a ticking clock that's going on in the background to kind of help build the intensity.
Yeah. But, it's really funny because like some of the sounds and I guess you can't call them melodies, but at least the compositions that he's creating, let's say, they have this interesting interplay with the action on screen in this film, So there's like a part where, you do get the kind of ticking and it kind of starts off like this, just sort of like repetitive drone. And then it like gets faster and faster and faster until it sort of like turns into like the roar of a jet engine that we then see like come into frame and sort of like takes over. And so it was this really interesting use of sort of seamlessly transitioning from one scene to the next, like going from ground to air and then using that soundtrack and those sounds and taking them from being score based and then almost having them become diegetic, over the course of like 10 or 12 seconds, which is really cool. To see them do that.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily, I think that's more Nolan than Zimmer at the end of the day, right? Like the direction to do that. And that's, I think, his ideations and whatnot. But Zimmer's still delivering exactly what Nolan needs to get the exact experience for his audience. And so you've got to give respect to that. And I think also just as well is the way that the two of them use silence to such an exceptional degree, which is probably a large part of what makes this a different war film than other films. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. And did you read at all or see at all what they did to the score to build the intensity? So the first thing my first takeaway with this was that it in many cases seemed like one big, long, swelling song or score that was interrupted by moments of silence to reset. And it always seemed to be ascending or escalating. And it's this magic trick that I guess has been around for a while, but Hans Zimmer and Nolan have teamed up to really perfect this. And it's on a lot of their films, and it's called the shepherd tone. Are you familiar with this?
No, please proceed. This is great.
So basically you take a note in 3 octaves. And if you, the high octave is building, all 3 are ascending in tone, and your high note, as it starts to get to a fever pitch, starts to fade away, and your mid tone starts to become the high tone, and your low tone then becomes the mid tone, and then slowly a new low tone starts to blend in, and it creates this never ending loop of what to your ear sounds like the music is constantly like building and ascending to. I saw on Vox, they described it as a barbershop pole of sound. So when you watch a barbershop pole, you're watching those red and blue lines constantly look like they're going up and disappearing, but it's just the same few lines, like starting over again. Right. And this is that audibly, which is bananas. I guess they started using this, back in, like the Dark Knight. They were even using it for, the sounds of the motorcycle, the bat cycle, or whatever you want to call it. So it sounded like the motorcycle was like constantly like revving up and going faster and faster, but it's just these 3 notes that are, used in unison. I guess even in Super Mario World, there's some parts where Mario goes up the stairs and they use this shepherd tone to make it sound like you're consistently just going up the stairs forever. So this is, I guess, an old sound trick that they kind of pulled out and brush the dust off, and that's why there are times that it sounds just like a swelling roar of sound, but it's like escalating and building your intensity and your blood pressure, like I said earlier. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And then especially with his use of silence in the relative space of the sound design, it really adds to this tremendous sense of fear and apprehension, right? So specifically thinking about the soldiers when they're trapped on the beach, which is the majority of the film, of course, but specifically with regard to the fact that like every time a plane is heard overhead, it's like the most terrifying, like instantly your stomach gets tight and you're like, oh shit, because like these guys are sitting ducks relative to any sort of airstrike, and we see the enemy performing successful airstrikes early on, which helps to establish that as a theme that we as the audience are then going to be conditioned to fear. And again, the silence of just everything going quiet except for the sound of those rotors and those motors in the air getting closer and closer. It's so spectacularly done. And as well, I think it probably lends itself to that experience, right? Like if you think about what those soldiers were going through during that moment, like nobody's chatting, nobody's talking, right? It's not like the Saving Private Ryan slow moments of like, oh, let's discuss what each other's doing back home. It's just like, hey, it's just like silent exchanges of like, hope we don't die, bro. Yep, me too, bro. Right? Like it's, and the film does a great job of expressing that. And I also feel like the film tried to do this with its casting, right? Like outside of perhaps maybe Cillian Murphy, who is, very recognizable with his doe eyes, right? And then maybe Tom Hardy, because everybody knows who Tom Hardy is at this point. I thought it was interesting that everybody ultimately kind of looks very similar, And so I think with the casting, it lends itself to that, like when you're on the battlefield, you can't easily identify your friend from your partner, from your commander. Right. It's just like a bunch of bodies and everybody, again, sort of looks the same from a distance. And so I thought that the casting, again, did a really good job of reinforcing that and allowing us to experience that.
Yeah, he went with a bunch of young unknowns to really drive your point home. Aside from, like you said, the Kenneth Branaghs and was it Mark Rylance is the old man on the boat. There are a few recognizable faces along the way in the older cast, but the young boys that are on that beach could be anybody. And Harry Styles was in there. I guess if you are familiar with his work, he's young whippersnapper. But other than that,
I didn't recognize him. I know who he is too, and I didn't recognize him, which I think kind of lends itself to my point because I saw that after the fact.
Was it Barry Keoghan? However, you say
Barry Keoghan, I think you say.
Yeah, Keoghan. dude, he's awesome. And
Yeah, he's great in everything.
He's not in this much, but man, what little bit he is, you have a lot of pathos for his character. I thought it was also an interesting choice to kind of take your point one step further too, he never shows you the enemy. Like you never see the Germans or whatever, coming in. You never see them on the other side of the wall. They're just this faceless enemy. You see the enemy planes a little bit, but you never see their pilots. It's not about good versus evil. Like I was saying earlier, this is a story of survival. That is just as much of an imposing threat as a natural disaster or anything else. And he kind of treated it that way. And then the heroism of the common man as they come over to rescue their soldiers from that foreign coast. So apparently that boat ride over to France from England is much more treacherous, and those seas can be a lot less calm than it was portrayed on camera. But other than that, man, yeah, that was intense. And then, there's these moments where you see Rylance's boat, going towards Dunkirk from England to go pick up their boys, and they're passing by battleships, and just that juxtaposition of these machines designed for war are heading one way, and then these innocent common people are going the other way, towards danger. I thought there's a lot of emotion, I think, that was driven home in this film. Let's talk a little bit about the cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema. Did you look up a lot about that or see some of the methods that they shot this on, namely that they shot this on film and IMAX and all the things they had to do for that?
No, what you got?
Well, just that they shot it, completely practical. And those IMAX cameras are crazy big, very loud, and Hoyt van Hoytema is a beast. And he was doing a lot of handheld. He was putting these things on planks of wood to run down the beach with them. Even so much as they were finding ways to mount these things on the planes when they were doing the dogfight scenes. They wanted to shoot these pretty practically. And so I guess they found these other planes called Yaks that have two cockpits or a double cockpit. So the pilot was able to fly from the back. And then they were able to mount this IMAX camera to film, Tom Hardy and the like up front. Was it John Loudon or Jack Loudon or whatever the other pilot? But that way they could film all that on an IMAX camera and do all these dogfight maneuvers while a pilot in the back was actually manipulating the plane. But so much of this was shot practically, right up to the point where. To Nolan's credit, as much as he gets a lot of shit for his dialogue and muted sound styles, for this one, he actually deferred to Panavision 65 millimeter because those cameras are much less loud. So for the dialogue scenes with Branagh on the pier and the dock and stuff like that, the mole, they call it, they were able to get a boom pole in there and actually film the dialogue practically on set. So they didn't have to ADR everything later. They actually switched cameras for the dialogue stuff. But otherwise, pretty much all IMAX, which, like I said, are very, very large cameras, very noisy cameras. And they were in really shitty conditions. It was very stormy on that beach. They would often be shooting in the rain or during, tide changes and stuff like that. So, the production, if you have time, go back and get on YouTube. If you're watching this show, you're already on YouTube, chances are. So just click over and watch some making of behind the scenes featurettes on Dunkirk. It'll really make you have a lot of respect for what they went through to make this film. It was crazy.
Definitely, yeah. And I also just really love the fact that it called attention to the fact that these civilians played this role in rescuing these people. That was not anything that I was ever familiar with. I think a lot of people can say the same. So also very cool to see that Nolan is sort of bringing attention to, at the time, overlooked group of people that serviced a really... important part in rescuing all of those civilians. I think they said that they were able to get over 300,000 people off of that beach at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think out of 400 they were able to save 330,000 of them and get them off that beach, and all of it was because of the bravery of civilians taking their boats across the pond and going to get their boys back. It's crazy. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's pretty much like an 80% success rate or something like that. So good on them. That's really cool.
Better than the military can do. Apparently.
Now, what is your opinion of Nolan as a director overall? Where do you think he ranks in the pantheon? Like what,
Right.
entire body of work, all that.
So that guy is playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. And
absolutely.
It's just crazy. Like, he's doing math. Like he's not, obviously he's approaching it from an artistic standpoint.
Playing 5D chess, man.
Right. That's crazy. So sometimes that, succeeds. And sometimes I think that the story and entertainment value and emotion of the story that he's trying to tell gets a little lost and convoluted in him trying to do this high wire act of his storytelling. So Interstellar wasn't for me. Probably deserves a rewatch, but man, did I try to like that movie and did not. Tenet was not for me either. But this is great. The first two Batman films were the most high art that we're probably going to get a comic book adaptation. The third one fell a little short for me. Love Memento. Following was so-so. We discussed it on this show. So he's very hit and miss. You would think for such a high quality auteur as him that I would just be right down the line and say, yeah, he's one of my favorites and blah, blah, blah. And he's really good. When he's at his best, he's one of the best. But there are some along the way that kind of fell short for me. How about you?
Yeah, so I've never really considered him to be one of my favorite filmmakers, and this film kind of forced me to do a little bit of a gut check and reassess that, because as I started just walking down the list, it's like the guy has never made a bad movie, first and foremost. I think the film I enjoyed the least of his was Following, and that's still like a 3-star film, right?
Sure.
And it's his first film that he made for no money, right? For $7,000 or whatever stupid budget it was, right? So, but it's been a long time since I've seen The Prestige, so I don't remember that one. But everything else of his, I really, really enjoyed. I actually really enjoyed Interstellar. I loved Inception. I loved Tenet. I love Memento. Like, he's a really strong, and now I love Dunkirk,
Right.
So I can't really think of anything he's done, like I said, that I disliked actively or even just found okay outside of his basically opening student film, So I think it's easy because, it's like it's one of those frustrating things. It's like when somebody asks you like your favorite whatever, and it's like, you have a basic bitch answer, but it's also just kind of like the objective truth, right? It's like when people ask me like, what's your favorite Pink Floyd album, right? I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan. And so, you want to say something super obscure to show off that like, the early stuff, so people like to be cute and go like, oh, I like Gumma, or I like Final Cut, or like all of this stuff. And it's like, the correct answer is Dark Side of the Moon.
Right.
It's a perfect album. There's nothing wrong. There's not a single off moment in the entire thing, and it's sold bazillions of copies. Everybody's heard of it. Everybody knows it. Your dad likes it. Like, it's not cool to say Dark Side of the Moon is like Pink Floyd's best album, but it's damn accurate. It just is. And that's how I feel about Chris Nolan right now. Like, you're going to ask me, who are my favorite filmmakers? And it's like, oh, I want to drop off like Cosmos Panatos, from Mandy or whatever, right? Like all these cool guys. Michelangelo Antonioni makes me sound super cultured, right? Like, but like, I'll be goddamned if Chris Nolan isn't one of our best Hollywood directors out here right now, man. He's, and in many respects, he's like a more commercial version of Kubrick. It's like Kubrick found out how to make money, because I do understand the criticism that his movies can be kind of cold and cerebral and emotionless, and I won't disagree with you there, but as someone whose favorite filmmaker is Kubrick, like obviously that doesn't bother me, right? There's room for all of it. And I think because there's not that much of that style of filmmaking represented in modern Hollywood, in traditional Hollywood, in the mainstream, it's welcome, and I appreciate it.
Sure. No, I mean, I can't disagree. I think that when it comes to Nolan, you're really splitting hairs with me, because, I could say that there are some films I liked less than others, or I didn't feel lived up to the hype. But that doesn't mean that we've talked about this on this show quite a bit, where, there are times that you're kind of put into a corner to ask opinions about films. And it's like, that's not my favorite film, or I'm giving it 3.5 stars or 4 stars. Everything Everywhere All at Once. You had an opinion about that, similar opinion, where you really like that film. We were just talking about this the other day. That's a great film to you. You just didn't feel like it was quite in that upper echelon that everybody was putting it in for films that year to herald all the awards and stuff. And I kind of feel that way about some Nolan films, where
Makes sense.
Interstellar a great movie? Sure. Tenet, like you said earlier, is probably a technical masterpiece for what it is. I just didn't feel like it reached me story-wise, narratively, as much as some of his other films do. I wasn't as invested, or I didn't feel that the ending was the payoff that I wanted, or whatever it is. I will say I don't think I've ever seen Insomnia, and I deserve to rewatch Prestige. I have not seen Prestige in quite some time. Since it first came out. So I'd like to go back and watch both of those, especially after seeing Dunkirk and how much I enjoyed this film. Absolutely great time. I mean, as much of a great time as World War II movies can be, I guess. I don't mean to make light of their struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you do bring up a good point, which is that I totally forgot about Insomnia. I remember thinking that was like a totally like 3-star film. So again, it wasn't a bad film, but it was also like with that cast and everything, you kind of just, I wanted it to be more than it was. I never went back and rewatched it. So perhaps with a fresh slate, you know, I could appreciate it a bit more, but yeah. And then, like you said, you know, Dark Knight, I always forget that like Dark Knight and Batman Begins are just like these perfect films as well. It's like you say, they're the closest thing approaching art that any of the superhero films are going to get to. And the other thing I think that I realized in watching Dunkirk, and I think what makes Chris Nolan work for me and for so many people is and you as well, is every movie he makes, regardless of the genre or the seeming genre, is ultimately a thriller. I think that's what makes everything work. Like when you watch Dark Knight, that's not a superhero action movie. That's a thriller that features superheroes. When you watch this movie, this is a thriller that takes place in a war setting. When you watch Tenet, it's a sci-fi thriller, right? Like, so he's, and I think, you know, part of it is, as you mentioned, the score and the sound design that's very consistent through all of his films. I think that lends itself to that. Sure. But every film he makes ultimately is a thriller. And I just kind of realized that. How about Oppenheimer? Do you think Oppenheimer qualifies as that, or would that be an exception?
Oof, that's a good question. I am going to say it was a drama they maybe treated like a thriller.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, he takes whatever the film's genre is and then makes it a thriller. Takes a war movie, makes it a thriller. Takes a superhero movie, makes it a thriller, right?
Right. Yeah, that film, Oppenheimer, was crazy, man, because like the first majority, the biggest chunk of that movie, acts 1 and most of 2, I feel like we were just being rushed right on through to the point where I felt like I was watching a 3-hour trailer for what was inevitably a 12-hour movie. Like we're moving right along. We're just getting the hits. Like, let's go along. And then as we get into the closing of the film, without giving too much away, they do kind of resolve that and explain why and give you some resolution. I thought Oppenheimer was a really, really good movie that everybody is saying is a masterpiece. I would not say Oppenheimer is better than Dunkirk personally. I think, this is him firing on all cylinders, as well as the entire crew. You know, they built, again, a lot of those sets. They had just the convergence of shit show on set material that they had, the recipe for disaster that, you know, those shots, because they're shooting everything practically like this on film, by the way, not digital. So you don't just get all these retakes. You're loading IMAX, you know, film mags onto the back of these bitches. So when you're doing the boat scenes, for example, and you've got the cameras on the boats, you've got cameras up on the wings of the plane, filming that angle as they're flying around. And you need to get a shot of the plane coming overhead, you know, that dogfight that's happening as they go over Rylance's boat as they're heading towards the shore to go pick up their boys. Think of everything and then you've got the oil spill with the fire and everybody in that, and that stunt work. You've got the sinking battleship. You've got this dogfight because remember the plane sunk their battleship, if you will. And so that's all that's all happening all at once. And so just think of everything that has to go right for all those moving pieces that you're filming simultaneously, because you've got the boys in the water, the fire goes up, the ship is sinking, and they're giving you dynamic angles of that to make you feel claustrophobic and all of that shit show that's going on, and everybody jumping off the boat, the dogfight. It's just like, man, if that boat just catches a tide and starts to spin around the wrong way and they're like, hold on, reset, back to 1. It's like, fuck, man, you got these planes in I mean, it's just, watch the behind the scenes featurette and your mind will explode. Like what these guys went through. It's like a James Cameron making Titanic level of pressure that, and they're all doing it in the actual sea. They're not doing it on a soundstage with a green screen where they could sink the boat and then raise it back up and sink the boat. It's like, no, this is all happening in real time, and any one of these elements for nature can set it all back. And what Hoyt was saying is that typically the worse things were outside, the more they all kind of wanted to go shoot in those environments, because it just felt like more gritty and real. And then
Sure.
you could see the misery on the soldiers' faces and shit more. It was more immersive versus shooting on a sunny, beautiful day when the seas were calm. Calm seas don't make a good sailor, or whatever the saying is. So yeah, fucking awesome movie, dude. A great experience. And see this on the biggest screen you can, the loudest speakers you can. One of the last things I will add is that this is the most teal movie I have seen in a long time. This movie is teal as hell, in the same way that I always forget how blue and orange Terminator 2 is. When you go watch that, the whole movie's blue. It's like, holy crap, that's a blue movie. And this is a very teal movie. I think that was very posh back in 2017, the teal and orange phase that we all went through.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree, man. It's superbly paced, feels like it's 35 minutes long, well crafted. Loved every minute of it. So
I'd go watch this again right now.
Absolutely. Gonna go ahead and finish with 3 adjectives, but first do want to remind you, if you haven't yet, please go ahead and like and subscribe. As well, if you agree or disagree with any part of this episode, go ahead and drop that in the sections below. We would absolutely love to hear from you. Ryan, let's go ahead and hear your 3 adjectives that sum up your description with Dunkirk.
These are going to be real quick and easy, pretty much speak for themselves. The first one is palpable, because it is. The next one is micro versus macro, because like I was saying earlier, it's a very unique war experience when you don't get involved in all the, minutia of government and politics and everything that's going on around them. You don't even see the enemies in this. This is a micro version of war that just shows, if you were there in this moment, this is what happens, and go. And last is masterpiece, because I think on every level, this is a masterpiece. It's got to be one of his best. Probably one of his most approachable too. I think when you get into films like Inception or Batman, those are more genre films. And I think you're going to weed out some of your audience that way. I think this is something you can watch with your friends, your girlfriend, your parents, your grandparents, put it on Thanksgiving, whatever you want. It's good for any occasion, as long as you don't mind a little war. I think this is on every level a masterpiece. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, you stole one of mine, which is why I hate going to you first all the time. I got to stop doing that. So
take that.
I agree. It was absolutely a masterpiece, technically and otherwise. It was also quietly intense, and it was also uniquely captivating. It was just it was an interesting approach to the war genre, not something that we've seen done time and time again. Definitely doesn't have the overwrought emotionality of like Oliver Stone war films, right? Like Platoon and such. So really dig the approach here. There was respect for the material, respect for the people, respect for the craft. Really great film.
I'm going to switch mine. Ready? I'm going to switch masterpiece, because I have another one and I scratched it out because I thought it was hard to explain, but it's Dad Takes Off Belt, because I felt like this had all the intensity of your dad taking off a belt to give you a good whooping when you're a kid. He doesn't have to say a word. Nothing has to be spoken. You know what's about to come, and you're like shitting your britches. It's just, I think that goes along with your quietly intense motif, but Dad Takes Off Belt. I will switch that for masterpiece.
Nice. Go ahead and give us your star rating, man, out of 5 stars. What you got?
Dude, 5 stars with a bullet. No pun intended.
Awesome. Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and give this one 4 3/4 out of 5. Just the only sort of little quarter. Yeah, no, just a little quarter, just because I do feel like the emotionality just could have been in there a little bit better, right? Giving me someone that I could have just followed along with a little bit more, to be slightly more emotionally invested in what's going on. But like, that is an absolute nitpick. This is, like I said, an absolute masterpiece.
Yeah.
I'm certainly one of the best films of the year. It holds up well. It's one of Chris Nolan's great films. I could easily see on a second viewing this, giving it that solid 5 stars, knowing what it is next time time walking into it. So,
Sure.
But yeah, that's just, again, the most nitpicky of quarter star slivers that I'm going to take off for that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Peters has gone on record
as
as saying he hates Dunkirk. I'm just putting this down. Says this is trash.
You
4
didn't give it 5 stars, you bastard.
Oh, the worst. Real quick question before we button this up. The boy that you start the film out with in the streets, that jumps over the fence and survives the other few that he's with. I believe, do you follow that kid? That's the kid that's underneath the mole that pulls up Harry Styles. That's the kid that is clinging on to the boat that's being dragged through the oil when that light's on fire. We follow him throughout, right? But to your point earlier, they all kind of start to look the same, especially when you get oil and blood and stuff like that on their faces. I started to lose track. It was like the ball under the coconut shell. But I believe that you start and end the film with him. I think he is one of the last people you see aside from Tom Hardy being taken hostage. Would you say that's correct?
I would say specifically because I don't remember. So I'm going to go ahead and go with what you said because I don't have anything better.
I was curious. It was an honest question. I'm not stating that that's a fact. It was
hey, anybody watching, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Let us know if Ryan's correct or not. And if not, give him a bunch of shit for it, okay? Because he wasted our time.
Yeah. I mean, I like this movie so much, you think I would have been paying attention, right? A 5-star movie.
We've got so much that we're analyzing throughout the course of these episodes, man. It's bound to happen. So, but hey, definitely check this movie out if you haven't yet. If it's been a while, go back, rewatch it. Both of us give this, among our highest recommendations. You can go to our website, esotericacinema.com, for more exclusive content. In the meantime, this is Jason Peters and Ryan Siebold for Esoterica Cinema, reminding you to enjoy the movies.